Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, we talk about what Mike Tomlin said about how the Steelers plan to handle more time without George Pickens. We also talk about the improvements on the offensive line with their growing experience and how the Steelers need to stop Saquon Barkley, especially the linebackers. All that here and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. You can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Steelers fans. So more information on George Pickens after talking with Mike Tomlin in his Tuesday press conference. And it appears that George Pickens' injury might not just be about the Eagles game, might also be about the Ravens game afterwards. The Steelers taking it week by week, but George Pickens officially labeled as doubtful, most likely out for this upcoming Eagles game. And it appears that Mike Tomlin may be playing it safe with the Steelers. They said that initially it looked like a minor injury on Friday when it happened, and then when they did an MRI afterwards, it turned into it was a lot more significant than what they expected. And so the Steelers had to sit George Pickens in that game, and then they also decided that he's probably going to sit this week. They'll see how he participates in practice. And with the short week, and you got, of course, this week they play the Eagles in Philadelphia, but that's the start of the 11-day stretch where they're going to play 3 games. And because 6 days after that, they're playing the Ravens. And then just a few days after that, 5 days after that, they're playing the Chiefs. So there's a lot of short order things that have to happen for George Pickens. And let's face it, the Steelers cannot afford to go into their biggest games of the season without this guy. And you may be sitting here thinking, well, Chris, isn't that the Eagles, Ravens, and Chiefs? Because that's the gauntlet that everyone's been waiting for, the craziest part of the second half of the schedule. And I'd say, well, no, because the Steelers are virtually a lock for the playoffs right now. For the Steelers to make the playoffs, all they have to do is win a game, or the Dolphins or the Colts lose. If any one of those 3 things happens over the next four weeks of NFL play at any point in time, they're in the playoffs. Now, do they want to win the division? Absolutely. That's a big part of this too. But you want George Pickens in those big games, and so making sure that he can be available then is important. So the question then turns to, how do the Steelers make more plays on offense without George Pickens in the lineup? They found a way to do that against the Browns, but granted, the Browns, as George Pickens said after the first meeting, are a bad team. The Eagles are not a bad team. The Ravens are not a bad team. The Chiefs are not a bad team. The Bengals are a bad team. But those are 3 good teams you're going to have to face. And I thought Mike Tomlin gave a little bit of insight into how the Steelers are going to handle this situation, how they handled it on Sunday with the short week of not knowing George Pickens was going to be missing until really the last moment. And then also how they can now handle it with a full week of practice preparing for that. Here was Mike Tomlin when he was peppered with those questions here throughout. He has a few different answers here, so do pay attention because he addresses a few different questions. Here's Mike Tomlin for his Tuesday press conference.
Mike, when you look at the situation with George, is there a big picture element involved that you want to make sure you're cautious and you don't aggravate the thing?
No, to be honest with you, no. There's enough things that have our attention in the here and now. We've kind of been in that posture all year. I don't imagine that would change. And so we'll see where the week leads us.
It's a little different. I mean, he didn't practice on Friday, but you were still planning on him potentially being available.
He did limited work on Friday.
Yeah, but, I mean, it was a little different, though, having a full week to prepare for that as that potential.
You mean the strategy component of Certainly. If he's limited, and he probably certainly will be limited at the early portions of the week, it'll give guys an opportunity to get extended in-helmet perspective on their prep if they are to get expanded roles again this week. Certainly.
What does it say about some of the professionalism that was there, that those guys were still able to go out even though maybe they hadn't planned, like a Scotty Miller?
And I think that's why I'm just so high on the collective. Those guys might be new to us, but they're not new to the National Football League. They're pros, man. They behave that way. whether you're talking about Scotty Miller or Van Jefferson or Ben Skoranek for that matter. All guys have been in the NFL, man, and I just think you saw, shades of that in their performance and the consistency of their performance last weekend.
Mike, in terms of his knowledge of the offense and what you've seen from him in a limited time, can Mike Williams be a guy that could step up for you in that role?
No question. I felt like he did. He did last week. As I mentioned last week in this setting, I view it only as a matter of time before his presence gets felt in a more consistent way in stadium. Practice has been like that for a number of weeks, and usually when you see people making plays in practice, it's a precursor to them making plays in stadium. And so George available or not, I expect the overall trajectory of his performance and inclusion in performance to be on the incline.
After halftime, did you guys make any adjustments in the passing game to, now that you had 30 minutes under your feet without George, about how to adjust against Cleveland?
I don't know that we waited until halftime. Halftime was an opportunity to solidify some of the in-game adjustments that we were working through in the first half. And so there were no real new discussions at half, but we did revisit some in-game discussions that we were having in the first half.
So you look at a few different answers there from Mike Tomlin. One thing that I think that rings true is that, there's professional expectations for all receivers. But to me, I think what the answer here is really more about Russell Wilson. And this is part of why you went and got Russell Wilson and the advantages that he brings. His experience on the field, his ability to decipher defenses, to find the weak spots, and to get the ball to the smartest part of the player, the smartest option on a play to counter what defenses do. This is where it's going to be most valuable, because before you could chuck a few balls up to George Pickens and he'd come down with, and you trusted his playmaking ability to be the difference maker. But in this game against the Browns, and I broke this down in a film study for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for you to look at, more closely and see some of the all 22 footage I was able to break down. But so much of what they did against the Browns involved Russell Wilson timing, knowing when the Browns were going to be lax in certain parts of their coverage, knowing, Arthur Smith drawing up plays to get mismatches or create opportunities of confusion in opposing defenses. And that's what they're going to need facing this Eagles defense, which is one of the best in the NFL. They're allowing the fewest yards in the NFL right now in total yards per game. I think that's going to be the key here, because we can all say, a lot of people might want, Mike Williams has got to go be Superman. No, he doesn't have to be Superman. He has to play his role and run, be that bigger bodied outside wide receiver. When they give you the one-on-ones, Russ is going to come to you, and you got to be ready to make the catch like you did on that long ball in the second half. Against the Browns. Scotty Miller, same sort of deal, whereas you don't have that body type, but you're a smaller, you're a quicker guy, you can run solid routes, get separation, win those spots. I also think getting to Calvin Austin in this game is gonna be huge. And again, this could be gains with an S on the end of it, because if George Pickens is out both the Eagles and the Ravens game, you're gonna need to win at least one of those games. Preferably you win the Ravens game, so you can clinch the division and not have to worry about that down the stretch, and know that you're hosting a playoff game no matter what happens down the stretch. So I say all that to say, I look at what this offense has, and I do think it has the weapons within it for Russell Wilson specifically to be able to move forward. Now, if this was, the Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph era, I think this would be a whole different problem that the Steelers would be facing right now, and there would be some serious issues. But Russell Wilson's ability to read defenses, counter them, make smart decisions with his head and with his arm, that's all about it. Looking off safeties, creating the matchups that he wants with his eyes, playing to the scheme and managing Arthur Smith's scheme, that's going to be imperative in surviving this period without George Pickens, however long it might be, whether it's just the Eagles game, the Eagles Ravens, or even Eagles Ravens and Chiefs, which is not out of consideration right now from what we're hearing. But again, I think the biggest weapon to overcoming the lack of George Pickens is actually Russell Wilson using all the Steelers' weapons. And again, it's not just the receivers, it's going to be the tight ends, getting Pat Freiermuth involved, getting Darnell Washington involved, Michael Pruitt and Connor Hayward if you have to, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, and Cordell Patterson fumbled in this game, but getting him the ball in the air could be a big part. The Steelers have been using the screen pass a lot more since Russell Wilson's come in. In fact, I think they're in the top 10 as far as screen yardage in the weeks since week 7 when Russell Wilson took over. So it's going to be about using all of those weapons and doing so to keep defenses off balance. And one thing I thought was really interesting, if you look at the tendencies of Russell Wilson, it is very hard to pick up on when he's going to do certain things. You know, there's certain things he's looking for, like that deep down the sideline, back shoulder throw. You look where but it's always in different spots and it's a different area. So as a corner, you can't prey on it every single time in the same spot. He makes it hard to do. If you look at the passing charts that he had for the Bengals game versus the Browns game, the last two games the Steelers played, you look at where he was throwing the ball for the majority. Yeah, he throws balls down the middle, but against the Bengals, he threw almost exclusively passes. If he was targeting beyond the first down marker, his passes were either exclusively down the middle or down the right sideline. Never down the left. He literally didn't throw a pass beyond 10 yards that went outside the numbers to the left of him, if you look at his passing chart. But on the Browns, it was the complete opposite. He didn't throw a single pass down the right sideline outside the numbers that went past the first down marker in that game, and he threw almost exclusively down the middle or to his left. And I think part of that is the Steelers do have a plan to keep teams off balance, and I think that's one thing Russell Wilson brings is he sticks to that plan. That is what's going to be imperative in this game is Arthur Smith coming up with a good plan. And I know people always love to rag on offensive coordinators, for every year in Pittsburgh, but I do think Arthur Smith is doing a good job with what he has and what the Steelers have been doing. And Russell Wilson has been bringing more and more of that to life with his ability to make good decisions on the football field, give his playmakers chances, and get the Steelers in positions to get scores. But a big part of that also is this offensive line against a really big defensive front. It's like the Andy Weidel Bowl because he's who built that team over there, and now he's helping build the Steelers. I want to talk about those matchups because that's a young Steelers offensive line for the most part, and they have a huge assignment in picking up the Eagles front. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We still got a lot to discuss. But first, remind you, this show is also brought to you by Built Rewards. Listen up, renters. If you've ever felt like you're stuck in this loop of rent payments, just watching your money vanish into thin air, it's time to turn that rent game around and start earning some serious rewards. That's where Built Rewards comes in. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent. Every month, pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. You use points to jet off on a dream vacation, put your points towards a flight or hotel stay with over 500 airlines and over 700,000 hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them towards future rent payment, and they're designed to meet your lifestyle. Pay rent hassle-free through the Built Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Built points have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate. Earn points by paying rent right now when you go to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL. That's joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL. Make sure to use our URL so they know they usually sent you. Again, that's joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL to start earning points with your rent payments today. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here today. I want to talk about the Steelers offensive line because I do think we are seeing improvements from this Steelers offensive line, both in pass protection and in run blocking. They look more consistently getting off the ball. Alan Saunders and I talked about it. It's why all of the offensive line got 2-star grades for their performance against the Browns. And man, this is going to be a tough challenge for the Steelers offense because this Eagles defensive front is a big reason why they're allowing the fewest yards in the NFL right now. I talked to Mike Tomlin. I asked him some questions about the offensive line and where they're at and how he views the progress, especially the three young guys that are lining up next to each other: Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, both rookies, and then of course Broderick Jones in his second year, but crazy enough, younger than both of those guys because of how young he entered the NFL. Here's Mike Tomlin. I asked him some questions about the Steelers offensive line and where they're headed.
Mike, you guys didn't win as many short distance situations the first time in Cleveland. This time around, each time you guys ran the ball 3rd and 5 or short, you converted. What did you see an improvement from your offensive line against their front this time around?
It's not always an improvement, to be quite honest with you. Sometimes it's just venue. You're in a road game venue. You're working on salad count. You lose the advantage of beating people to the punch. You work in your venue. You get the benefit of a cadence. And sometimes it's just as simple as that.
As far as a young trio of offensive linemen, Broderick, Mason, and Zach, how have you seen them grow as just lining up together now, a few months now playing together?
I just think there's, there's no shortcut to experience. We've been in some hot circumstances with that young collective, as you mentioned. They face some top-notch people. They're going to face some top-notch people this week. But I think anytime you're successful, man, there's growth in it, and we've thankfully had some success. We've faced some challenges, but we've had enough success, man, to keep this group moving and motivated. And obviously I see signs of that growth. They all are capable. That's why we drafted them in the positions that we drafted them. But there's a learning process. There's an adaptation to this environment. And sometimes it's good to go through that with company. And so I would imagine the collective has been an asset to the collective in that regard as well. I know those guys spend a lot of time together, and that community, I'm sure, strengthens them as individuals.
So one thing he's talking about there is, them growing together, and they have. You look at how Mason McCormick played. Mason McCormick was always aggressive, but now he's becoming aggressive to a point. He's becoming aggressive within the Steelers run scheme, and I think that's a big part of this. You look at certain plays that the Steelers called, screen passes, where you see Broderick Jones, Zach Frazier, and Mason McCormick out leading the way, throwing big blocks down the field, both in this last game and against the Bengals. They are becoming a more cohesive unit, which is what we said they were going to need to do all along this season, why it was going to take time. Now's a big chance for them to show just how cohesive they are. Again, this is a tough defensive front from the Eagles. You think back to some of the big defensive lineman prospects we've talked about. Oh man, it would be nice if the Steelers could get those dudes. They're facing some of those guys, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, the two just mean mugging dudes out of Georgia, right in the middle of the Eagles defensive front. Milton Williams, Nolan Smith as your edge guys there, and then you still got athletic linebackers behind them like Nakobe Dean, Josh Sweat, Zach Bond. They're going to be coming after the Steelers. They have to be ready for that group to be physical. You have to move them off the ball. You're going to have to win in the trenches. And when I was asking Mike Tomlin, I was talking about the short distance, and yes, he dismissed it as saying, hey, well, you know what, being at home helps. You're not going to be at home in this situation. So that's going to be a big challenge. Against the Browns, they were able to win every time they ran the ball. 3 times when they had a 3rd and 5 or shorter, the Steelers ran the ball all 3 times. They gained first downs. And I think a big part of that was they were able to get off the ball well. They were able to play at the same pace. And that's something that can really help them. Now, how do they do on the road this time? Again, Philadelphia, no joke of a place to play. It's loud. It's crazy. The Steelers haven't won there since 1965, which means Mike Tomlin, nor Bill Cowher, nor Chuck Noll ever won in Philadelphia as the Steelers head coach. It's going to be a challenge to do that in this one, because you're going to have that aggressive defensive front. You're going to have your young offensive line dealing with the silent count, dealing with the noise. This is where it's going to have to come down. I think they have to win some serious battles, especially for Najee Harris and Jalen Warren and Cordero Patterson to get off in the run game, and to protect Russell Wilson, because this Eagles defense is going to come after him. They have to be prepared for that. But I think that they are more prepared than we've seen in the past few years. This might be the best iteration of a Steelers offensive line since the last good years of David DeCastro, Marquise Pouncey, Ramon Foster, Alejandro Villanueva, that whole crew. And I think that's it's a good sign for their progress that they've gotten to that point. But this is probably the best test that they're going to get to see where they are before the playoffs, because this defensive front is nasty with the Bills. Not the Bills, the Eagles. The Ravens, we know who they bring to the table. We know what they went up against that week. The Chiefs got Chris Jones and those guys, but the Eagles, I think they bring a unique perspective here as far as the different options that you have to account for here. If they're able to get push in this game and they're able to win the trenches and let the Steelers run game take over and the Steelers win the time of possession in this game, that will go a long way to giving the Steelers defense breaks against what is a very talented Eagles offense. And I want to talk more about that, because on the flip side, whereas we're talking about the Steelers run game getting going with this young offensive line against a tough defensive front, the Steelers have a tough defensive front themselves, but they're also facing an MVP candidate in Saquon Barkley, and he's in an offense with Jalen Hurts, with A.J. Brown, with Devontae Smith. They've got weapon after weapon after weapon. It's going to require a full, detailed service to stop this. It's going to require, the Steelers aren't going to be able to throw all their weight behind trying to stop just Saquon Barkley in this one like they did the last time they played him when he was with the Giants in 2020. I want to talk about that matchup, how the Steelers bottle him up, and how they play the run better in this game against the Eagles. We'll do that next year on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, remind you that our show is also brought to you by Ice Shaker. I know you're like me and a holiday shopping list is, let's just say, far from complete. Well, if that's the case, I've got the perfect gift for the passionate sports fans in your life. Perhaps you've heard of Ice Shaker. Ice Shaker is now officially licensed with the NFL, NHL, NBA, NCAA, and MLB, and will make the ideal gift. Created by and used by the Gronkowski brothers, Ice Shakers has sold over 1 million bottles. They have changed the game with workout bottles, and this is the gift that you've been looking for. Go to iceshaker.com, use the code LOCKEDONNFL at checkout, and you'll save 25% on your order. Kitchen-grade stainless steel bottles that won't absorb odor like plastic bottles do, and the patented twist-in agitators breaks up powders, but is silent when you shake it instead of the annoying ball. Customizable. Send us your logo or check out our custom shop to customize your favorite bottle. Turnaround time on custom bottles is 3 to 5 business days. Order your team branded bottles today at iceshaker.com. Use code LOCKEDONNFL for your 25% off your order. Ice Shakers, show your support for your teams with the best branded workout bottles on the market. That's Ice Shakers. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here today. We talked about the Steelers run game. We talked about the Steelers offense. Let's talk about the Steelers defense, and this is a big task. And we're going to break down more of this on Crossover Thursday, all the things going on with the Eagles offense. Jalen Hurts not having his best year. Him and A.J. Brown apparently feuding. That's nothing new to Eagles quarterbacks and wide receivers if you know history. But the thing is that you always have to respect it, and Mike Tomlin, giving him that nod of respect to Saquon Barkley. He called him Mr. Barkley during the press conference. That shows you, like, okay, that means the Steelers are making him the plan to shut him down. But it's going to require the defensive front and the linebackers really to take over in this game, because with the talent that they have at wide receiver and quarterback, the Eagles do, the secondary can't do too much to be pitching in here all the time to shut down Saquon. Yes, Joey Porter Jr. and Dante Jackson or Corey Trice, James Pierre-Paul, whoever's lining up at corner, they're going to have tough assignments to stop A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jahan Dotson, and that crew. But you're going to have to trust them to win those matchups, because you cannot overcommit to either side of stopping the pass or stopping the run. It's going to take a balanced effort from the Steelers defense, but this Steelers defense has been tough up front. We talked about how the Eagles defensive front has been nasty. If you look at how teams have played the run this year, the Steelers are the 4th best run stopping team in the NFL right now. They're allowing just under 92 yards per game. That's pretty solid. The Eagles averaging a little bit more than that, averaging over 100 yards per game, actually almost 106 yards per game on their side. So the Steelers defensive front has a chance to be a difference maker in this one. And they're going to be the biggest role in doing this, not just the Cam Haywards, the Keanu Bettons, but also the Patrick Queens, the Elandon Roberts. And to me, they're going to be a big part of this. Listen to Mike Tomlin as he addressed several different parts of this, of questions regarding Saquon Barkley, regarding the defensive front, the run defense, and specifically Elandon Roberts, because I think he plays a huge part this week in stopping the run. Here's Mike Tomlin.
Mike, you mentioned the Eagles offensive line. What differences are you seeing from Saquon Barkley running behind this line that maybe you saw his performance with the Giants?
To be honest with you, I didn't see a lot and didn't study a lot in the Giants being an NFC team, and so I'm probably not the appropriate person to ask in terms of comparing the two situations for him.
How about as far as just what you're seeing from him this year with the Eagles?
He's dynamic. He is. He checks all the boxes in terms of physical talent. He's got top end speed. He can hit the home run, as evidence of the Rams game. He's good in tight space areas. He can get downhill. He can lower his pads and run behind his pads. He's got good lateral abilities. He can make people miss. He's just a really complete player, and obviously been a significant acquisition for them.
Mike, along those lines, this will be a test, obviously, for your rush defense. Last year, I think you finished 19th. This year, top 5. Those improvements, is it as simple as Cam Hayward is back and playing at an all-pro level? Is there more to it than that?
I haven't spent any time digesting this year relative to last year, to be quite honest with you. Our goal is to be better in all areas every year. And so, that's where our focus is. But as you mentioned, Cam is available and playing at a high level. We've also acquired Patrick Queen and some other significant players that I think are doing a really awesome job. Deshaun Elliott, I think, is tackling at a high level from a safety position. But in terms of comparing it to last year, I hadn't wasted any time doing something.
Mike, what is it about Landon Roberts that allows him not only to make the plays in the backfield like he did the other day, but even take on the blockers and blow up plays even if he doesn't make the play?
He's a 9-on-7 linebacker. I laugh often because I remember being at his pro day. Kevin Colbert and I stood in the parking lot at the University of Houston, man, and talked to he and his parents after pro day for about an hour. Because we went down there, on an expedition, if you will, looking at a lot of things and a lot of people, but we were really enamored with this guy's demeanor, his relationship with the game, the way he played the run. We knew that guy was going to be an NFL run-stopping linebacker. And, almost a decade later, man, he's got a resume that kind of illustrates that. And so that was our interest in him when we acquired him a year ago, and he's done nothing but prove that. And I'm thankful to have him. He shows up in moments, as you mentioned, that fourth down moment. He made a really significant play in a goal line circumstance against Dallas, man. If we recover that ball, man, we might all still be talking about that play. Obviously, it's a big week for him because we play Mr. Barkley. And so saw him in the building earlier. He's watching some tape. He's a professional. He understands his skill set. He understands his role. He's good for team.
A big part of what's going to be about shutting down Saquon Barkley is being in position, winning those positions often, understanding what the Eagles are trying to do at different parts of the field with their run game, when they're pulling guards, beating them to the punch. And we saw Landon Roberts do that kind of stuff very well. You remember that fourth down stop that I broke down where he recognized the receiver was coming to crack down on him. He beat the receiver to the punch and was able to slice through the formation and blow up the play in the backfield. But we also, Alan Saunders brought up another play where Posich, the pulling guard for the Browns, pulled out in space, and Landon Roberts read it, jumped in front of it, and then mauled Posich and basically blew up the run by taking out the lead pulling guard. It's going to be things like that both he and Patrick Queen are going to have to be part of in this game, and also Peyton Wilson when he's called upon, because the Eagles will try to spread you out and then run with Saquon Barkley as well. And when they're spreading you out, the Steelers are going to try to get their fast guys out there as well. That's going to be a big part of this game as well. Those linebackers being quick, being smart, and winning those matchups. Also the defensive front not giving up too easy matchups, keeping those linebackers clean, winning their gaps, being showing gap integrity. The edge players, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, they cannot allow people to get outside of them when they're coming to their end. They have to be able to push the run back inside to their guys. It's going to take a team effort. And as I said before, when they last faced Saquon Barkley, they did a historic job in shutting him down against the Giants. In fact, if you look up in the history of the NFL since the merger, since the AFC and NFC, or AFL and NFL joined back in 1970, there's only been one better rushing performance of limiting a running back with 15 or more carries in a game, and that it came back with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar being held to 5 yards on 15 carries. The Steelers held Saquon Barkley to 6 yards on 15 carries. That's just insane with how well they guarded him there. But to Mike Tomlin's point, that's now Jalen Hurts, not Daniel Jones. That's now AJ Brown. That's now Devontae Smith. It's also a really talented Eagles offensive line that's also nothing to sneeze at right now. You look at Cam Jurgens, Landon Dickerson, Jordan Mailata, Mekhi Becton's been thrown in there. Lane Johnson's been there forever. They have the offensive line. They have the talent. This is a complete offense that you're talking about here that you're going to have to do this against. And it's why it's going to be a big week for the Steelers linebackers and defensive guys up front to win those positions, just like you need the Steelers offensive line to win those positions in their run game. It's a battle in the trenches. It's going to be a big part of this game. The Steelers are used to athletic quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson. I think that bodes well for their matchup with Jalen Hurts, but Saquon Barkley is a completely different beast than Derrick Henry. And I think that could be the unique challenge there. And again, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, the Ravens don't have receivers like that on their roster that can be as dangerous. That's why it's going to be a tough matchup. And that's why we'll continue to break down elements of this matchup, especially tomorrow when we get into Crossover Thursday, where I talk to the host of Locked On Eagles about where they see their team at, get you updates there. We'll see how the Steelers injury report is looking throughout the rest of the week, looking good signs for Ilario Ogunjobi and for Deshaun Elliott to have a chance to play in this game. They registered injuries injuries at the end of the game. But we will see how the Steelers continue to handle the George Pickens not being able to play in this game, most likely, as well as how they'll handle other things here. Again, if you want to check out that film study I was talking about with how Russell Wilson uses the rest of the offense, around George Pickens while he's gone, check out the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. That should be up by the morning if you're watching this on Wednesday. Thanks so much for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques, as well as Blue Sky. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can find me here every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. If you want to help out the show even further, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. We thank you for everyone who does all those different things. We're back tomorrow for Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.